Every week we do a Q&A with interesting and accomplished members of the adaptive community to find how they persevered, how they innovated, how they built communities, and how they found solutions. Welcome to the Nametags Chat Podcast. Welcome to the Nametags Chat Podcast, where we talk with interesting and accomplished members of the adaptive community. Today, we have an old friend, Ian Rice. Back when I knew him, he was a wheelchair racer. Now he is a professor of kinesiology at the University of Illinois. Ian, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to see you, Chris. It's been a while, probably 2004-ish, maybe.
I would have guessed it's been since 2004.
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't have kids back then.
No.
You weren't a professor back then.
No. I was a wild man. Yeah.
You were a wild man? Really? Is that the...
Yeah, maybe. Not,
wildish, wilder than you are now.
Yeah.
I can't stay up past 9 o'clock at night now. So, I was much wilder than I am now.
Yeah.
Did you ever think that you'd spend your the rest of your life at the University of Illinois? I mean, you started at like 17, 18, right? As a freshman.
Right. Yeah. Completely kind of a full circle experience. It wasn't premeditated. I never would have imagined coming back to the place where I sort of became a wheelchair user, nothing against the place, but yeah, never thought I would end up working here it's been almost 12 years now.
You've been working, how about you started there as a gymnast, right?
Right.
Scholarship gymnast, first day of training. Is that what happened?
Not the first day, but the first semester of, so early into the first semester is when I was injured. Yeah. But I was a gymnast. I was obsessed with gymnastics for years and years. That was my obsession and passion, and was injured in a gymnastics crash at U of I. Yeah.
What did you end up doing? How did it work?
Yeah. So I was just at a practice. I think it was a Sunday practice on high bar over a pit. Pit is, foam cubes that allow you to kind of land sloppy and in theory, right? Not for me that day. I was on high bar doing a release move where you release, flip, twist, re-grab, and I kind of just got a little bit lost in the air and then over-rotated and landed not directly on my head, but just past my head and kind of caused some neck flexion there and dislocated my vertebrae, and that was it. It was instant.
Did you know instantly as well, or?
I did. Yeah. It was horrifying. Yeah, I mean, you can imagine. Yeah.
Yeah. It's almost like you're drowning in this pit.
Exactly. And after I kind of communicated that something seriously bad was up, they can't just move you quickly. So, I had to wait for the paramedics and to get you out properly on a backboard. And so, yeah, it was wild. And this is stuff I haven't talked about or thought about in years. So it's weird. I'm not going to break down in front of you right now, Chris, but it was,
it's good.
Yeah, it's good. I would imagine. Yeah. It's stuff I haven't thought about in years and years, but yeah, it was a wild experience, wild and crazy.
Was high bar your event, or what were you?
I was an all around gymnast. I did every event. High bar was one I liked, I was good at it. It was just kind of a crazy, fluky accident, no more, no less, I think.
Which is often the way that these things happen.
Yeah.
But then strange that you ended up, breaking your neck.
Yeah.
At one of the best places in the country.
Right.
A competitive wheelchair athlete at the University of Illinois.
Right.
Did you know anything about the wheelchair team?
Had no idea. Had no idea there was a wheelchair athletics program. Although I had one incident where I remember eating in one of the cafeterias with other gymnasts, and one of the gymnasts was friends with this girl named Jana Stump. Do you remember her? She was a basketball.
Okay. I didn't know a lot of the basketball players.
Yeah. So that was my only encounter with a wheelchair user in my time at U of I before my injury. So I had no idea they had this world-class program. And this is 93-ish. So this is Hollenbeck's, Briggs, this is Iniguez, this is Gene Driscoll. It's the whole gang was there, right? At that moment. I had no idea.
Top people in the world. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it was later when I was in rehabilitation. I went to rehab in St. Louis, and they had a wheelchair athletic team that would come and do like roller workouts.
Okay.
And that was my introduction, the first time I had ever seen wheelchair sport in any form and in any way. And it made an impression on me.
How quickly, because I didn't see any of that in the hospital.
I think it was a unique thing. It was this rehab center they were very dialed in, connected to adapted sports, which was great for me. I think one of my OTs, brought me to watch a wheelchair basketball practice when I was, I shouldn't have even been out of the hospital. I was so newly injured, right? They shouldn't have. It was pretty ugly. But I remember after hours at the rehab center, these athletes would work out, and I remember, there's nothing to do after hours at a rehab center, and so you're bored. So that was something I was interested in. But I remember in who I saw on a dynamometer pushing a racing chair at 22, 23 miles an hour was Don Dowling. Remember Don Dowling, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
And so, I think a lot of newly injured people, when they're first exposed to wheelchair sports, they think it's patronizing. They think it's, the whole spiel. I did not have that impression. When I saw Don, I immediately saw the beauty and the kind of the racing motion, someone who's really competent at it, with pounding away at the hand rim. And I immediately thought, whoa, kind of cool. And it was a spark.
It was a spark. What's that transition like from gymnastics in a wheelchair to wheelchair sports? Because gymnasts are so strong. It's you're using your body weight against you effectively.
Trying
to figure out how to use it well.
It certainly helped me. It helped the rehabilitation process. And I remember, going back to U of I and meeting all of the wheelchair athletes and meeting Marty Morse. And, it was a transition, but it wasn't the smoothest transition in the world. The way wheelchair athletes use their musculature is different. It's a bit different, and that difference and those intricacies very much shaped kind of my research passions. It all kind of, it all fits, it all fits together into what I do now and what's informed what I do now. And I'm sure we'll get to, but, that transition was, starting to build up, the posterior muscle groups, your back, right. And pulling yourself backwards and getting strong that way. But, I became a pretty good wheelchair racer relatively quickly, but not, it didn't happen immediately. It took a lot of work. But I certainly had the people around me to help.
Well, it wasn't just wheelchair racing though, too, right? That's a big campus. And you came out of the rehab, out of the spinal cord rehabilitation, and then you had to get around the University of Illinois. That's a workout, just getting to class, getting to your dorm, right?
Absolutely. Now I remember, like you said, if there's one place to be injured at kind of that age, it would be U of I. Where else could you have a roommate who's the same age as you, who has exactly the same level of injury as you, who's been injured, the same time as you? That happened, right? And then you've got these veterans, and so it was an amazing way to be socialized to disability, but also it's insulated, right? But it's insulated in a good way, right? You see these extraordinary people, extraordinary athletes, and it does insulate you from the state of disability in this country, which is, again, another thing that not everybody does marathons. Not everybody is, weighs 130 pounds and can bench press 300 pounds, so these kind of crazy expectations and unbelievable role models, but it wasn't until later on that when I went back to St. Louis for OT school that I really started to experience disability in more of a realistic sense. And I got to see that, folks with disabilities in this country, by and large, not doing so well, right? For a host of reasons. which also shaped and my research focus and my passions now.
Yeah, because you effectively came out of the hospital, came out of rehab, and then had to basically like pick it up. I mean, how did the making the decision to join wheelchair sports happen? I mean, you saw some of these guys, you met some of these guys, but was that a proactive decision on your part? Was that Marty, who was the coach, coming to you and saying, "Hey, I heard about this and we have this option"?
From what I remember, I mean, it was that initial encounter with seeing Don Dowling and being impressed by that. And really it gave me a goal and a drive, and I want to do that. And, having, being excited about something with a new disability, that's a pretty powerful tool, because typically at newly injured, you're not excited. You're not looking forward to the adventure. Right. So,
Or the physical part, right? I mean,
yeah. And I, I was a gymnast, but I was in bad shape. I mean, it was tough to navigate the campus, and I probably went back to school way too fast. I remember at the time people thinking, "Whoa, you're already back," and they were probably right. I probably shouldn't have been back, but in retrospect, I'm glad I did it. I'm glad I continued doing the things that I should have been doing at the age of 19. There were a lot of twists and turns and a lot of infections and a lot of all the stuff, right? But it all worked out, and I'm glad I did it. But it was tough.
yeah, you're forced to. I was in the hospital for 2 months and then went back to college, so it's probably similar kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah, exactly the same kind of time frame.
And then you learn a lot really quickly because you have to.
You
like
have
if
to.
you're still in the hospital, it would be, "Oh, well, okay, I tried this today," and it's like, "No, I've got to get to class. Like I have to figure out how to make this thing work."
Yeah.
And you learn, and the social part for me was a huge part. Just sort of leaving the hospital. It sounds like you had a good situation. I had a great nurse.
Yeah.
I didn't really have any peers.
Yeah.
At the hospital. I had one roommate who was really a peer, but otherwise I was like, there's nobody who's really sort of like me or on a similar kind of path.
Yeah.
And then you go back to college and people, you're getting around differently, but it's people on a similar path. Did you know you're a professor now? Your parents are professors too.
Yeah.
And so did you know when you started college that that's what you wanted to do, that you wanted to be a professor?
Not at all. No, my OT made such an impression on me. That's what I was focused on, was occupational therapy. And that's what I eventually I did. And while I was in OT school, you have different rotations, different field works to learn what type of therapy you might like to practice in. And I did an optional one that was in research with a research focus. And I loved it. I loved the idea of being able to conduct research that impacts the way that therapy is practiced and presented was appealing to me. And also that, as an athlete, I was interested in movement efficiency. And that was something that I was always interested in, right? What is it about the way that a person interacts with their wheelchair that makes them fast or not so fast or efficient? What is it, body positioning, the human user interface, right? All of these things were super interesting to me. But to really understand them, it's just physics, right? And I needed to learn more physics and biomechanics, and unfortunately, and so that was, I realized, the next step would be a PhD, and it would be with a biomechanical or bioengineering focus, and that's what, we were, while I was in that internship, we were working with the University of Pittsburgh, and that helped kind of
Rory Cooper.
Yep.
Okay.
Rory Cooper. And I just submitted a huge grant with Rory just a month ago. I thought I was going to die. It was such a crazy process.
Arduous process. And Rory also was a wheelchair racer.
Yes.
Too.
Yes.
And so common interest, but then went into research. And you kept saying that your transition from the hospital back to school was informing your research. Did that start immediately, or did this start after you graduated? Because you got a bunch of this as an athlete too.
Yeah, yeah. You know, there were so many different life steps that have kind of informed what I'm doing now. I think, my time at U of I and even a little bit after was very focused on sports, very focused on racing. Um, it wasn't until I started working out in the community in an OT capacity, looking at how people with disabilities participate, and more specifically, barriers to participation in physical activity, right? What are these things that are keeping people with disabilities from being active and having good quality of life? So those things kind of, I learned more about sort of just everyday living after University of Illinois. And then Pittsburgh kind of bringing it all together and just learning the craft of research, learning statistics and physics and biomechanics and the tools that you need to be able to examine those things more deeply.
So what kind of stuff specifically are you looking at? Like how people participate, but
Yeah.
what are the barriers? Is it a strength barrier? Is it a mobility? Is it a social barrier?
Yeah, all of the above and more, right? It's a complex, I think where I started was with wheelchair propulsion biomechanics, right? So how the wheelchair fits your body. My dissertation was teaching people how to propel with good technique using real-time feedback. So having these instrumented wheels that measure the forces that you apply to the hand ring, and then streaming those variables back to a person in real time. But as I learned, it's more than just training. It's how the chair. You can set up a chair, a great wheelchair, to fit a person horribly with an Allen wrench in 5 minutes, right? You can move the rear axle back 5 inches and devastate them, right? So it's about the fit and the technique. So done a lot of research in that arena, in training, technique, skill, and then fit as well, and then also exploring things like transfers, right? So trying to keep wheelchair users' upper limbs healthy, right? Because the upper limb injuries, when you rely on your upper limbs for everything, it's not a big surprise. Total devastation, right? And what you see from the literature is that shoulder repair surgeries don't go so well, right? Best case scenario, you can't use your upper limbs for months and months, which is a non-starter for many people right off the bat. But prevention is key. So preventing upper limb injury still is a huge emphasis of my research and my interests.
And you picked that up as an athlete as well, because Marty, your coach,
absolutely
component of what it was like 2 pulling exercises for each pushing exercise. And
there you go. Yeah.
In that stability. And
yeah, I mean, Marty was a true scientist in terms of his plan for his athletes and creating well balanced athletes, both physically and psychologically, right? So all of these lessons were kind of fed my later pursuits in research, and also teaching as well.
Teaching as well. So you started teaching in the interim?
So that was part of the deal, right? When you're a professor, I do research, service, and teaching, right? So I teach biomechanics classes, I teach disability studies classes, and then I train PhD students. And actually, kind of an interesting story. This is crazy. It's kind of like the inverse of my story. So I always kept close ties with the gymnastics program at University of Illinois. And I was talking to their head coach. His name is Justin Spring. He's an Olympian. And he's like, I've got this athlete. He's an amazing athlete. He's kind of at the end of his career, really smart kid, just not sure what he wants to do. I talked to this kid and he was asking me all these questions about how to examine the biomechanics of gymnasts. And I thought, boy, he would be a great graduate student, and pulled him away from gymnastics. And now this former world-class gymnast is obsessed with wheelchair racing. Right? And he's been working with Adam Bleakney for the past 4 years. And actually, he's going to defend his PhD in a couple days now. and he should have a PhD, knock on wood, in a couple of days. But he's obsessed with wheelchair racing. He's been working with a team. His research has been examining high intensity interval training for upper limb athletes, right? Getting more bang from your buck. Because if you look at the physical activity guidelines for wheelchair users, it's largely based on lower limb activity, right? So right off the bat, we're at a disadvantage. And so whatever dose of exercise is being sort of recommended is not enough. It's not enough, right? So finding more efficient ways to accumulate or stimulate the cardiovascular system with the upper limbs. That's been his pursuit, and it's been a pleasure. He's been a great student. So
That's great.
being able to train future research is amazing as well. It's a privilege,
No, I'd imagine it's a huge privilege, and obviously he didn't have to break his neck.
Right. Yeah. So not the full inverse, right? Yeah. That would have yeah. Oh man. Yeah.
No, we don't want to do that.
We don't need to do that. Yeah.
Wow. So that's really cool. That's cool to see. And it's cool, because it's funny when you look back on it and think, for you,
yeah,
you didn't really know that the wheelchair racing, the basketball, the quad rugby, you didn't know that any of that was really going on.
Not at all. It was right under my nose. I had no idea.
Yeah. And then now you're sort of able to introduce somebody to, which has become really scientific. I mean, under Marty, it was scientific. Under Adam, it has continued to grow in sort of the science of how to train the athletes.
Yeah.
It's amazing what the athletes are doing, just in terms of speed, in terms of times. It blows me away.
Yeah, me too. I follow it, and I've had a chance to publish and do research with Adam Bleakney. We just wrote a huge grant together. It's been great. We actually did a study looking at the difference between the solid racing gloves versus old school harness gloves, and measuring the force differences between the gloves. We published a paper a number 3 or 4 years back. But so I've tried to stay close to my adapted root sports, but then examining kind of the broader population of just wheelchair users and folks with other types of kind of mobility related disabilities as well.
And with the research that you're doing, it's really specifically to everyday chairs. It's easy enough for us to be talking about racing wheelchairs, but it's for everyday chairs that you're doing your research.
Yeah, mostly. But that was something that was kind of a harsh lesson to me early on, is that to get research dollars, you have to pitch a study that's generalizable, that has maximum impact, right? And as much as we love adapted sport, and we know how beneficial adapted sport is to persons with disabilities, when you compare that population to people affected by cancer, people affected by fill in the blank, right? It's just not, the impact is not there. But in recent years, the government, the NIH, has started to recognize the importance of adapted sport in keeping people with disabilities physically active, the importance of that.
Yeah, I mean, the how it's applicable, the wheelchair racing, I mean, in some ways it's kind of like you're looking at like a Formula One kind of thing.
Yeah.
Where this is at the top, but I would imagine, I think that this is where you were going, was the activity, the remaining active. And I think is that a challenge for a lot of people with disabilities, is remaining active. And
it is. And so I think where I was headed was that now the government is putting up real money, real research dollars for adapted sport, and to examine the facilitators and barriers to physical activity among people with disabilities, people with mobility limitations. And there's the kind of the mechanical adapted sport side of it, but there's also examining barriers, the social barriers, stigma, lack of training, lack of resources, the fact that equipment's expensive, right? How do we bridge those things, and so there are people with varying levels, with different levels of expertise tackling these problems. And I have my small little part of it, and it's been great. But the fact that now I can study actually write a grant about an adapted sport is a lot of fun, and it kind of brings me back. Whereas before, I had to kind of stay on the periphery a little bit.
The full universal kind of usage. To what do you attribute that shift? The shift that wheelchair sport, adaptive sport is something that is worthy of grants, that's worthy of interest and application for other parts of the population.
Yeah, great question. You know what it is? It's the economics. That there have been a few great studies that have shown that people who are physically active, who participate in sport with disabilities, are far more likely to be employed, far more likely to live above poverty level, and the benefits go on and on. The health benefits, the psychosocial benefits, the psychological benefits, right? These have been demonstrated and very powerful, right? I mean, I'm not the first to say this. This is a common line, like in my field. But if physical activity and sport were a medication, that would be the most powerful drug that we have for health, right? And it's true in able-bodied folks, and I think even more pronounced in people with disabilities. Because you and I both, we've been in the game for a long time, and we have friends who are wheelchair users who have drifted from sport and who have not stayed physically active. And time is not friendly to our bodies if we do not stay active. I mean,
unfortunately, I understand that all too well.
We all do, and it's brutal. It's brutal.
Oh, I've been back in the gym just in the last month and a half, and it is one of those, like, I'm trying to work up to where I used to warm up.
Yeah, it's insane. It's insane.
It is crazy how quickly it happens and how much it affects our lives, right? Because that affects getting into bed, getting into the shower, getting into the car. If you have to get off the floor.
Yeah. Everything.
It really does. I mean, it is amazing. What's amazing to me is that those studies have demonstrated a real benefit.
Yeah.
It's often really hard to go to the root of the problem, right? So physical activity is really at that root of the problem, where it's going to, I remember getting my first wheelchair made, and it was a 16-inch wide wheelchair.
Yeah.
And now I'm in a 14-inch wide wheelchair. And I think there was a bit of a thought of like, well, you'll grow into it.
Yeah.
Which is not a great thought, right?
It's not a great thought. Pushing a chair that's too wide for you can devastate your shoulders, right? The mechanics of a chair that's too heavy and too wide and not fit appropriately is devastating. And the other problem with the wheelchair, kind of the wheelchair industry, is that people don't pay for wheelchairs out of pocket, right? Health insurance does, right? And so you find manufacturers are put in this position where they're forced to design not for what's optimal, not using the best materials, but for what insurance will pay for, right? And so you don't see progress the same way that you'd see progress in bicycle frames, right? Our wheelchairs do not look like the latest, Trek or whatever, and they should, but they don't.
Well, especially when you're pulling that into your car, right? So pounds here or there in a not completely balanced, not a strong position, your shoulder is just completely exposed. And obviously our shoulders are our lives. Tell people, my shoulder hurts, I just go around in circles. And they're like, what? Oh, you're just going around. Yeah. Like, no, we don't want to do that. It's not.
No. Yeah. It's the typical thing, the people who could benefit the most from technology and training and aren't getting those things, right? People who are older who use wheelchairs, they're not getting 14-pound wheelchairs. They're getting big, clunky hospital-like wheelchairs, right? And the same is true of, think about the time people are allotted for rehabilitation these days. It's not 2 months and 3 months the way it was when you and I were, it's weeks. And
I don't know about you, but I didn't know much when I left after 2 months.
Yeah, the same for me. You know, it was like you said, the real learning starts once you leave, and you have to have the courage to put yourself out there and put yourself in tricky situations, tricky environments.
And social
Yeah,
environments. I mean,
yeah,
it's the worst, your worst nightmare. I mean, it's the kind of like, the nightmare that you have, that you show up in front of a crowd naked kind of thing, and you're like,
absolutely. Yeah,
which is sort of what you're doing. I'm not exactly, though there
yeah.
are definitely, those times that you're like, are my pants up or my pants not up, kind of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's funny. Yeah.
The dignity, you're reduced in some ways to being a little kid.
Yeah. In many ways, yeah. Yeah. And yeah, you look at people who quote unquote who have given up, or but what that really looks like in practice is it's just someone who doesn't do anything, right? And they don't evolve, and they don't progress, and they don't develop new exciting memories as a person with a disability. They cling to the old ones, and they're just not able to evolve and not able to find happiness, and the only way to do that is to live and to put yourself out there.
How much does this apply to the general population? I did a presentation at the UN at one point. It was on chronic disease,
Yeah.
and I opened with, I don't have the luxury of getting out of shape,
Yeah. That's
because
a
I
good point.
really don't.
No.
How much does that apply to the general population? Because it's all strength to weight, right? I mean, it's this ratio.
Yeah.
Ours is more specific, more acute in some ways, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah. Well, you know, I think it is it is a function of strength to weight ratio, and maintaining that balance. But um, you just see folks becoming sedentary, and when you become
that happens in general, right?
that
I mean,
happens just in general, yeah.
as we get
When
older, we get more sedentary, really.
Yeah. And what happens is, so it becomes this vicious cycle where you become sedentary. And when you're sedentary, you develop certain metabolic changes happen, right? Which makes it harder to break that sedentary behavior, right? So it's just this, you have so many factors or so many barriers that are put in front of you when you lose strength to weight ratio, when you gain weight, it creates problems with pain. And when you have pain, you don't want to be active. So prevention is so important in changing those behaviors as quickly as possible, and then maintaining them, like you suggest, is so important, because it's so difficult to go back. It's so difficult.
It's incredibly difficult. Do you have, I mean, study wise, you're on the academic
Yeah,
side, right?
yeah,
So in terms of breaking through, because if you haven't been working out, if you haven't been active,
yeah,
you start doing it and you think, that first day you get a bit of that rush and go, I mean, so I went back to the gym. I probably have not been in the gym in like
yeah,
10 years.
yeah, me too.
I've been riding my bike. I've been in my racing chair. I've done, a few marathons and things like that. So I've done enough to sort of be something.
Yeah,
But I went back to the gym and I checked in, and so then I have to get to the elevator to go up to where the actual gym is.
yeah,
And I'm thinking about getting onto benches,
yeah,
transferring back and forth.
yeah,
I'm thinking about being weak,
yeah,
thinking about potentially like, missing a transfer, doing something, doing balance wise, doing whatever. And there was a part of me that was like, I should leave. Like
yeah.
I'm
Right.
a liability here. And I used to do this a lot. What is there any recommendation that you can make to people to make that easier?
Well, that's part of the work we're doing, is we're trying to find ways of bringing fitness to people. We're trying to find ways of improving technology, lowering the cost of technologies, adaptive sports technologies, to get them to people so that like you said, it's like just to go to your average gym as a wheelchair user, you got to be at the top of your game to be able to sit on some of these tiny benches and manage, right? What an able-bodied person just takes for granted. So yeah, we're working, one thing that we're working on, and many are working on this, are just better physical activity monitors, right? I think the best we have perhaps is maybe the Apple Watch, right? But even that, it's not telling, it's not really able to tell you power output, right? Or the workload that you're working at, or activity intensity, right? Those algorithms are all calibrated for able body, lower body exercise, right? So, the best that we can get right now is maybe a physical activity monitor that can kind of count maybe strokes, but not do that in real time, right? So we're working on physical activity monitors that can really give you the metrics that wheelchair users, that are useful to wheelchair users, and can actually tell you physical activity intensity and accurately provide caloric expenditure and things like that. So those are things that can help. But yeah, I mean, prevention is key, and there's not a ton available to folks with disabilities right now.
Yeah, and it is, the stigma is the hard part of just not knowing, not being armed as well in terms of like your knowledge of, okay, I can get in here and I can do this and I can do that. And yeah. I mean, it's, I don't know, it's been 6 weeks or something like that for me.
Yeah.
And I'm starting to kind of feel like I know a bit of what I'm doing, but even just like grabbing dumbbells off the rack, or
Yeah.
you do a bench press and maintaining balance, not like dumping the weight and clang clang. And
Yeah. It's, I mean, when you go to a gym for the first time, it's got to be a reconnaissance mission for the first week. There's no working out happening. It's okay. Can I use that? Can I use that? No, no way over there. Maybe over there. It's, you got to build up. Right? You got to build up, and there's barriers. There's many barriers, and the literature on the barriers is fruitful. Researchers have highlighted the barriers very well, but the solutions are a little bit less clear, right? The solutions are tricky. They're not obvious, and they're not easy, and they're hard for all the reasons that physical activity is hard for anyone. All of that's already there. But then there's all of these new unique things to persons with disabilities that we just have to find clever ways of overcoming, clever and efficient ways of overcoming. And there are things coming, but it's not easy. It's not a cakewalk.
This is some job security for you.
There you go. Right. Yeah. So
how did the professor thing happen? I mean, so obviously, so you said you went to OT school.
Yeah.
And then when did you decide that this is it? I'm going to my PhD. And
yeah, it was in OT school, doing some research in OT school. We were working on a protocol for wheelchair propulsion. We were looking at how, oh gosh, what was the study? It was so many years ago now. It was looking at how the wheelchair impacts the daily lives of users, and what aspects of the wheelchair were most impactful to people being happy, having good quality of life. And I think I remember the study found that, it was an interesting finding. The wheelchair was two things simultaneously. The most important thing to keeping someone active and happy, and the key thing that was sort of debilitating, right? So the interpretation there was that any wheelchair won't do. It's got to fit the person. It's got to match their needs, and these are things that all wheelchair users know intuitively, right? And it's taken time for the literature to kind of catch up. And I think that was another thing that I failed to mention, is that all of these things that you and I kind of know intuitively from our years in adapted sport are not so intuitive in the literature, or they've become more intuitive. But you need sort of empirical evidence to demonstrate some of these things, that adapted sport and physical activity are worthwhile for the government to spend money on. it's worthwhile for the government to create grassroots programs that get kids early, and develop healthy trajectories early on.
So craziness, this is an amazing transition for you into two 6-year-old twins.
Yeah, right. So yeah, there's right. So that's the next phase, right? Is parenting kids with having a disability, and others have spoken more eloquently than I could ever speak about this, but having a kid it unlocks things that you didn't know were inside of you, and humbles you in ways you never thought. I remember I was obsessed early on with finding a good way of carrying these two little kids.
Yeah.
And I remember I made my way to a pet store, and I found like this dog holder, and I thought I got it calibrated and worked out just right. And by the time I got it all figured out, they were too big to fit in it anyway, so we have this huge dog mat now that they use when they build forts. But that was that was crazy. But yeah, just lots of fun experiences with the kids. But it's amazing how comfortable they are with it, and just how they, I don't hug a kid the way that someone's standing up with it. They jump right on my lap, right? They interact with me, and lots of wheelchair users or parents know that, and they've experienced that, and their kids also just become really intuitive and very sensitive to the environment, and what's accessible and what's not, and what impacts daddy and what doesn't, and what's fair and what's not fair. And they become real experts very early on, and amazing advocates as well.
I would imagine. I mean, there have to be a couple of, I see it with my dog sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Where she is on the grassy embankment 6 feet away from me.
Yeah.
I'm like, come. And she's like, no, I'm eating grass. I am not even going to acknowledge that you're there. And I just want to grab a pebble and at least get her attention.
Yeah.
And I'd imagine kids can do that exact same thing, that they're just out of reach. And it's got to be, this has to be the lesson, a far greater lesson in having a child.
Yeah.
Than anything, than anyone else's.
If they want to get away from me and they're messing with me, actually, you can probably see it. See those stairs right there, that landing up there?
See the stairs, yeah.
That is a safe space from daddy right there. Yeah.
I was going to ask if you were still at the office or if you were actually at home. And
I'm at home right now. Yeah. They'll be home any 10 minutes ish. So you might see the wild men themselves, but we'll see.
Which is just because it's also one of the things that has to be the hardest thing to think about is just initially picking them up. I mean, now they're old enough they can jump in your lap.
Yeah.
I always thought you take a gallon of milk or something like that and put a handle on the back of the kid so you could grab on to the.
Exactly. That was brutal. Yeah. I loved when they had overalls, so I could kind of hook my hand in the overalls, and my wife was watching me do it but yeah, that was tricky. But boy, they grow so quickly that once you have a system and you've got things worked out, everything changes. But
you also have a bit of a cool factor. I mean, you were an athlete, this kind of stuff. You've got a cool looking chair. It's lightweight, which helps, right? I mean,
absolutely.
It's oftentimes the bond is through the equipment. Oh, check it out.
Yeah.
You got a shock on that. That is so cool. Or
yeah, that's absolutely true. And that's why I need to stay fit as long as possible. So I'm not too over the hill by the time they're game for riding 20 miles on a bike, or I want to be able to do that. So that's my motivation, to stay super fit, or as fit
I
as
think you should. No, the bike is the place where I've had some of the funniest interactions. I've had kids literally point and laugh at me.
Yeah.
Because you're lying down, you're in this sort of street luge-y looking thing.
Yeah, you're low. Yeah. You think in Utah though, they're a little bit savvier probably than
this. I think was in New York actually. I think I've had it 3 times in New York where kids just literally just point at me and laugh. And I'm like, it's not exactly what I was going for.
What I was looking for. Yeah. That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
what do you see in trends? I'll get you out on this question.
Yeah.
In trends, like where is it going? Where's your research going? What questions do you have to answer?
Yeah. I'm just trying to, right now, trying to improve exercise protocols, upper limb exercise protocols. Like, what is optimal? What gives you the biggest bang for your buck? What stimulates your cardiovascular system the most with as little work as possible, right? So like when you're doing high intensity interval training and you're working really hard and then you're not working. You're working really hard and then you're not working. When you're not working, your body actually still is working and it still is burning calories. So exploring those, the optimal timing and dosing of exercise is kind of what I'm interested in right now. And then also the bigger questions, the bigger picture of bringing physical activity to more people. You're not going to be able to mail $2,000 hand cycles to thousands of people across the country, but maybe there are other ways of getting equipment, less expensive equipment to people, and other ways of motivating people. We worked with a group here in computer science, these programs that are like, they're kind of like apps, but that are based on artificial intelligence, that actually they take into consideration a person's demographics, but also their preferences and their disability characteristics and their level of expertise, and then suggest activities, but then also how to deal with friction to those activities, barriers, so kind of a computer science approach of helping people to be more physically active. So whatever it's going to be a multidisciplinary, a multimodal thing that is most effective. It's not going to be any one thing that helps people the most.
Exactly, because it doesn't have to be super high tech. I mean, you're talking about how expensive it can be to get a hand cycle.
Yeah,
you can get a great workout in your everyday wheelchair.
Absolutely, you really can. You can. Yeah, you just got to be smart about it. Yeah, I've been doing that the most recently, and it's been working.
Oh yeah, no, I had one recently. I did a speech at the beginning of the month, and I sometimes go and do like my speech as I'm going around, just tooling around in my everyday chair.
Yeah.
There's a Jackson Hole, and I started going up the mountain, and I got to a point where I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it up this thing.
Yeah.
And then it was also like, if I turn around, if I get perpendicular
to
gravity here, it's not going to work out well. So I did make it up, but it's you can get a good solid workout, get your heart rate up. And so you don't need the high tech stuff.
You don't. No, you don't
necessarily too. But yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Ian, this has been a total pleasure.
Likewise. Yeah.
It's back together with you. Yeah. Yeah. And I'm glad you're doing so well. Tell the kids I'm sorry I missed them, but next time.
Absolutely.
I will probably make it out there at some point, out to the university.
I hope so. Yeah. Please give me a heads up, and
that'd be good fun. That'd be great fun. Well, keep up the great work. Really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity. Much appreciated. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, sounds good. Thanks a ton. To all of you, thank you for joining us. As usual, the greatest gift you can give us is to tell your friends. Tell your friends to tune in. Tell them this was awesome. There'll be another cool guest next week. This will be a traditional podcast, and please like us, please follow us, and we will continue to grow it and bring you great guests. So we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks.